A citizen was driving on Elm and Highway 2, where he saw smoke coming from the house. Local fire department responded in their engine. They arrived on scene. The house is fully ablaze. They kicked the door in. A firefighter entered the living room and through the heavy smoke crawled on the living room floor looking for people in the house. As he got to the hallway between the bedrooms, he bumped into something. He went to throw the blanket off so he could see. It was clear from what he saw there that something heinous had happened. And he came out to me and took me aside and said, "It looks really weird in there." Yeah, it was a gruesome scene.
February 28th of 2008, I was the lead detective working for the Spokane County Sheriff's Department at that time. I got a call at home about 5:30 in the morning calling me out to an incident that happened on Elm Street. It was completely unusual. So I wasn't really entirely sure what to expect.
This was my probably 5th month as a homicide detective. I was really new. So it was daunting.
When I first got there, the house was smoking still. There was firemen coming in and out. I went in through the front door. There was just a haze through the house, which kind of gave it a little bit of a haunted house effect.
Once I got in there, the whole scene, the way it was laid out, I said, yeah, I don't care who you are. It's something that you don't forget. All of the pictures had been removed from the wall and purposely placed face down on top of the couch, which led us to believe that it might be some ritualistic thing. There was blood everywhere in the hallway, blood stains all over the wall. It was impossible to get into the hallway without stepping in some form of blood pool. Once I came around the corner, I saw the body of a male there, partially covered still with a blanket, with a big, huge sword sticking out of him.
I have seen cases of knives and swords even, but I don't know that I've ever seen a broadsword like that. It was pretty big piece of work.
He was laying on top of a guitar in the hallway. He was covered in blood. The blood was all dried out from the fire. Clearly visible to me at the time was a huge incised wound to the side of the head right here, and a huge incised wound right to the side of the neck. I wasn't sure the sword was the murder weapon, but it was clearly some kind of sharp implement, like a knife. Just past the body of the male is an open doorway with the door standing open into a small bedroom. And literally shoved between the bed and the nightstand table is the body of a young female. She had been stabbed repeatedly, many, many, many times. A minimum number of 26.
She was on the floor, kind of like she was on her knees, leaning forward with her head towards the wall. And it looked like there was a samurai sword stuck completely through her neck.
But it turns out it's actually just propped in there. Whoever put it there tried several times to make it stick out of her neck. It was disturbing that somebody would brutalize them so badly, but part of me thought it was just look at me, look what I did. Look what I can do. It just seemed violent and unnecessary and excessive and just plain mean. And I felt really bad for her. Who might have been capable of committing such a crime? It seemed at once both personal in that they knew them and totally antisocial. They knew them, but they just didn't give a So.
I had become fairly proficient at compartmentalizing. I don't connect myself to what happened there because I wouldn't be able to do my job. People don't call the police because they want to come and cry with them. That's not why I'm there. I've got a job to do. Number one, try to do an identification of the bodies because we didn't know who they were.
The nature of the posing, the nature of the injuries just seemed to have a bizarre feel to them. I've had training on ritualistic killings before, and some of the things that you saw in this scene were similar to what they teach us. Just actions for action's sake. No purpose behind them other than to just gratify the doer.
The supervisor of the forensic unit came out and said, "Boy, we have gold." I said, "Oh, do tell." She said, "There is a bloody fingerprint on the inside of the back door." I said, "I want to find whose print that is." That leads me to a suspect. That is what we call a clue. We're just going to take the whole door down to the forensic unit for fingerprint processing to swab the blood samples and all of that stuff that we needed to do to process that door. We're going to do it right away.
So as we finished examining the scene in the house, the homeowner showed up. Lori, she's standing out front of the house that's clearly burnt. She was clearly upset.
So I ran up, and I think my daughter was there. And we ran up to the line.
It was creepy, it was eerie. There was cops everywhere. One of the detectives came over and asked to talk to my mom. It was just so weird. Like, it was such a weird thing to hear. He said, "Did you have any weapons in the house?"
Do you own any knives and swords? I go, "Why?" He said, "Well, we just need to know." I go, "Well, yeah, my other son kind of collects them. He's got a display on his wall." And he goes, "Okay." And then I left. And then we're sitting there just freaking out. Why would they ask me that?
My phone rang early in the morning, and I believe it was my son-in-law, Ian, and said, "The house is on fire on Elm Street. You need to come now."
My daughter, Katie, she goes, "Mom, there's someone in there. There's a deceased person inside."
And of course, we were counting people down that we knew could have been there, but they were okay.
We knew from talking to Lori that Lori lived in the house. It was her house. Her son Tanner lived there as well. There was a lady who lived downstairs who was the approximate age of the woman who was in the bedroom.
I got a call from an unknown number, I believe, and it was the police to make sure that I was alive. which was weird. I asked if someone had died, and they said there was somebody.
Well, I only knew it could be one person. My youngest son, Tanner.
I'm standing like 5 feet behind my mom, and she just collapsed into a pile on the ground. And it was really hard to watch, you know?
I remember just like embracing, like, and then I felt like I kind of held her up at the beginning and just like, no, not Tanner, not Tanner, not Tanner.
I could not make sense of it. That shift from like harmony and happiness to horror was such a dramatic, I couldn't register it.
When they were asking us, did he have any enemies? We were like, he doesn't have an enemy. Trying to even fathom that somehow he was in that house dead, and we didn't even know who could be mad at him.
Then they finally told us there was a female too, and they eventually came out and said she has dark black hair, short hair. We had no idea who that other person was.
So I'm racking my brain. It was just a lot of questions and a lot of fear.
Well, I couldn't imagine who else would be in the house. Who else could it be?
Spokane is located on the eastern part of the state of Washington. Spokane City is the largest metropolitan area really on this side of the state, this side of the Cascade Mountains.
It's pretty, but we have our fair share of serial killers. So we've had lots of those over time. Green River Killer in Seattle. Yates here. And several others. So it's beautiful. And we have serial killers. One thing we do often that I don't necessarily agree with is we tell people, hey, we had this murder and there's nothing for anybody to be concerned about. Somebody was murdered. We don't know who did it. They're walking around the community just like everybody else. Maybe they had a reason to kill this person. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they have a reason to kill you.
The part of the whole experience that was the worst for me was the police officer saying, nonchalantly, mind you, you're gonna have people coming in here like knowing it's a murder scene, like kids, and they're gonna rummage through stuff and be like, oh, cool. You better board the house up and take anything out of there that you want. And here's a card for the cleanup crew, because they don't clean anything in the house. The violence that was there is untouched. It's a Halloween murder show scene in there. So we came back to the crime scene as it was getting dark. There was no power in the house.
I saw it go from my mom's house to the scariest place in the whole world. I remember just like having light kind of flash over certain areas and just being like, oh my gosh. I mean, there was blood everywhere.
I remember standing where Tanner died, looking at the huge pile of blood that was there. And the streaks on the wall. I kept thinking to myself, this is like something from Halloween.
It was dark, it was horrible. It was one of the worst experiences of my whole life.
We went down into that basement, but now it was pitch black. And I heard a sound. It was like a dunk, dunk, dunk. And I couldn't tell what it was. And I'm looking around with my flashlight. And I go back to this little nook. And my mother's exercise ball was on the ground. And it was right below where Tanner had been murdered. His blood had saturated all the levels of the floor and were coming down, and they were dripping from the ceiling, and they were hitting that ball like candle wax. It's just surreal. And the whole house smelled burnt like a campfire. And 4 years after that, I couldn't camp. Because I couldn't smell that smell of a campfire for 4 years. You know?
Tanner was our youngest child. He was just a great son. There's a lot of memories of Tanner.
Road, yes, they're on the road.
He's steering right now. No.
We were coming out of my parents' driveway where I was raised out in the country, and he always wanted to get on my lap when we would drive that big Suburban.
Straight ahead now. See the road? You gotta just hold it still. Go straight ahead.
And I said, okay, Tanner. He was only like 2.5 or something.
Hands, watch the road. Yeah, watch that road.
The funniest part was how the brothers and sisters were reacting in the back seat.
No, I think
Drive us on the bridge.
Katie especially, she was just kind of freaking out, you know.
A little bit of concern there from our girl.
Priceless watching that every time.
The first part of figuring out who killed somebody is figuring out who they killed. But we still had no idea who the young girl was. When we searched the bedroom near the body of the female, we found a credit card with a name on it. For a lady who was roughly the same physical makeup as the girl who was deceased. I wanted to know if she was the unidentified victim. I also could tell that whoever committed both crimes had more violent tendencies to the female. The female had been stabbed way more, so I thought they would probably be more closely associated with the female than the male.
So we had a name of somebody, and we started following that up. That's a lead.
Lori wasn't able to give us any information on who the female might be, and she didn't know the person whose card was on the table. She'd never heard of that lady either. In the process of trying to find the lady whose name was on the card, we ended up calling some numbers and spoke to a guy who identified himself as her husband. And the detective just wanted to know where she might be and how they might get a hold of her. And he was less than cooperative with any of that information. He said that he was a long-haul trucker and he was driving across the state and they'd been having some marital issues. He wouldn't confirm any information about her. And then he hung up on the investigators. That was weird. But later, the lady, she actually called us. And she was fine. I guess she heard from her husband we were looking for her. She didn't know anybody at the house. She has no idea how her card ended up there. So we could rule her out as the decedent and consequently her husband out as the suspect. As to who this girl was, just from physical appearance alone, she was quite disfigured, so it's hard to say for sure. She didn't have fingerprints on file, so we couldn't identify her with fingerprints, which is generally how we do it.
We needed to find out who this person was pretty quickly.
It was clear from what we saw that that person was likely going to reoffend.
I did have to question, is this a serial killer? Is this somebody that I need to be afraid of? Is he still out? Is he going to come after me because I didn't come home? Or come after Lori? Because we were the survivors.
If you have any information on this case, the sheriff's office is asking that you call the tip line. That number, of course, 242-TIPS.
At the time, we're so overwhelmed with losing our son to such a horrific thing that I don't know if we even thought about what the community was thinking. I'm sure the community in that Spokane area was really wanting to know, because it must have been one of the worst murders in a long time.
We received information that Tanner had an ex-girlfriend that had been making statements that she wanted to hurt him.
Tanner had this girl in his life that he was really close with at that time in his life. It was very clear that she had a lot of feelings for him. I know it wasn't reciprocated because he told me himself.
It would have been consistent with what we saw, that if it were a crime of passion, that she could have done it. We knew that they had known each other. We knew she had access to the place, and she'd made threats. So it fit a lot of the different aspects of the case.
If I had to pick one person, just something toxic, like if I can't have you, no one can't, one of those scenarios, she fit the bill. Yes, I completely was able to see that scenario.
We wanted to find Tanner Pell's ex-girlfriend and talk to her and figure out where she was and try to alibi her out or include her as a suspect.
On February 26th, I came home. Tanner that evening had brought a couple of his friends over, and I didn't know any of them. And it was just like Tanner to bring new people in. I think this gentleman had only been in town for a week or so. He was working at the same restaurant that Tanner was working at. Tanner introduced him as Justin.
It was 2 nights before the murders, and he walked in and said, "Mom, I met a guy at work who moved up from Las Vegas, and he said I'd kind of like to help him make some friends." And I felt okay about it because I couldn't imagine, I'd never met one of his friends I just didn't fall in love with that didn't end up calling me Mama Lori.
And so I did give the police Justin's name very early on. And that's only because I didn't know him well enough, because everyone else Tanner had brought around, we had seen several times.
So he ended up calling us and saying, "Hey, I'm here. You guys want to talk to me?" So they drove right up there to talk to him.
Sarah was just lovely and kind. She was kind of in the background. She wasn't really a part of a lot of the discussions because she didn't know everybody. I also understood her relationship with Justin to be just very casually dating. I didn't have any impression that there was anything serious or anything like that happening.
I was interested in finding her because I wanted to know if that was her, to see if she was the unidentified victim.
Well, it could be, it might not be. But at a bare minimum, that person has some questions to answer.
I thought perhaps if that's who that was, that the person who did the murder might be more associated with her than with Tanner.
We found the car in Camelot, which is a little housing development north on the Newport Highway, a couple of miles away. And they found blood on the inside.
So we were comfortable once we saw that. This is definitely who it is. And the medical examiner determined that it was Sarah Clark.
If people could know just the travail that's going on in my house right now, it's just incomprehensible.
She was beautiful. She had a beautiful smile with these huge dimples. We loved her so much.
It was horrible. Felt so sad for Sarah's family.
Sarah's car was found in Camelot, where the Camelot Park is. Justin Crenshaw lived with his sister in that same housing development 5-6 blocks away or so, I would guess. The point is to find out who has the opportunity, what does the evidence tell you, where does it lead you, and go that way.
At that point, we were able to rule out Tanner Pell's ex-girlfriend because she had nothing to do with it. There was no evidence that pointed to her there, which left us with Justin Crenshaw.
So I sent a couple of detectives up to talk to him. They made contact with Justin, and then the detectives talked to the sister.
She was concerned because he didn't seem very concerned at all about what might have happened at the house. Well, it just seemed odd to her. And she knew he had violent tendencies, and she knew he'd been in trouble with the police before. She was concerned that he might have had something to do with it.
Tanner had said, I know he's been in some kind of trouble before, but, he was just a kid that looked like Tanner. You just think, might not be a great kid, but when I went to sleep, I'll never forget it. I had a bad feeling, no doubt about it.
I'm racking my brain trying to figure out, should there have been a red flag? Is there something that I missed? I definitely went back to that evening and thought about all the different conversations and all the different dynamics and things that I maybe blew off that I should have given more thought to. Like when Justin was telling me about his gunshot wound, or that he was not going to take any of his organs with him when he died. Just sort of those weird things.
Running his history, you could see that he'd been arrested in Las Vegas. He had stabbed a guy or cut a guy or something when he was younger. So we contacted Las Vegas. As it turns out, he had prints on file, and they in fact did fax a set of prints up to us.
But they did not compare to the one we had on the back door. We knew he had a pair of black shoes. Justin's family all described that he was wearing black shoes when he left. He had a pair of black Nikes. But he said, I don't have any black Nikes. And also, while they were talking to Justin, they saw a small injury here, a cut on the back of the finger, and a cut on the back of the palm here. Almost every brutal, violent stabbing that I've investigated, that knife becomes covered in blood, and blood is very viscous and very slippery. So it isn't unusual for them as they stab to start to slip off the knife and cut themselves.
The problem was his fingerprints weren't quite clear enough on the facts to make a direct comparison with. So then we thought, okay, we need to get the prints from him. So we decided that we would detain him and take him downtown, get a set of prints, do a search warrant for his DNA, his clothes, fingernail clippings, photographs, all of that stuff. And then we would have a good fingerprint to compare to the print on the inside of the door. So that's what we did. While we were waiting, he needed to go to the bathroom. And then he washed his hands like his life depended on it twice. Which I don't mind a guy, I think it's appropriate to wash your hands after you go to the bathroom, but that was really serious. Right? He was washing his hands like he was going into surgery. Once we got the processing done, it was a matter of just waiting for the results.
We thought that Crenshaw was the killer, but he might not have been. And if he wasn't, that person was likely going to reoffend.
We got the results back from the forensic unit supervisor, and she said that bloody fingerprint is Justin's left little finger. Yeah, there it is. That's what I'm looking for.
I told him, you're under arrest for the first-degree murder of Tanner L. and Sarah Clark. I found it powerful to use their names. He was the scariest guy I've ever been in a room with, and I've known lots of psychopaths. He was matter of fact, and I had seen what he had done, so it was a relief to be able to tell him he was under arrest.
The truth is, though, that when we got the fingerprint match, what we got was enough to arrest him for it. That's when the work starts. The deputy found a knife out on the road, maybe a mile away. It was right between where the murders occurred and where he ended up in Camelot. And it had blood on it, and it was believed to actually be the murder weapon, which was pretty remarkable.
Which turned out to be Tanner's favorite chef knife.
We also sent a couple guys up to go through his aunt's house, looking for where the black Nike shoes were, which we found.
He said, I don't have any black Nikes, because it turns out they were covered in blood.
That is pretty much the got you moment.
Good evening. He's been in Spokane for just 2 weeks.
But tonight, Justin Crenshaw is in jail accused of killing 2 people in North Spokane. Both victims had apparently been killed with a cutting instrument.
Justin Crenshaw had little to no response as the judge read the graphic details of the accusations against him.
The judge gave Crenshaw 4 chances to speak. He declined.
No, thank you. I don't want to take anything away from any of the families.
While we don't know exactly what happened, it appears that Justin Crenshaw was alone in the bedroom with Sarah Clark, and some argument broke out in there. Justin accessed Tanner's favorite chef knife and began stabbing Sarah there. Tanner, who was most likely playing guitar, heard the commotion and came to the bedroom to assist, at which point he was attacked by Justin Crenshaw, who stabbed him several times, killing him right there. And then he went back to finish killing Sarah Clark. And then spent lots of time in the house, putting the pictures down, taking items that he found in the house, stabbing their bodies with it. Doing things that made no sense except just to be brutal and just to enjoy himself simply for gratification. And trying to burn the house down because he knew there was lots of evidence that pointed to him there. When I talked to him about what I had seen him do, he was as casual as talking about football. He'd basically cut the head off his girlfriend and killed his best friend and then stuck stuff in him for no reason other than to be cruel, and didn't give a shit. He will kill you and not even care.
Part of me was absolutely shocked when I learned it was him because he didn't give off killer vibes, I guess. But one of the things that the police told me very quickly is that because Justin was so violent and so evil, and there just wasn't a reason for what he did that they could establish, that it was very good that I didn't go home that night, because I very likely would have been killed as well.
We didn't see him officially until the trial. Being in that courtroom with him and you're so close, I hated seeing him. He was smirking a lot, like often those kind of people do. And I just kept looking at his hands on the stand, and I just kept thinking, those hands were here. I just couldn't stop looking at him. And I just think, man, those hands took that life away. As we were leaving one day and we had to walk down the same court hallway as Crenshaw,
he like darted towards me and got like this close to my face and did like the wink wink and to my face. He goes like, they like took him to the ground. Mind you, I was like 5 months pregnant with my son, so I couldn't do anything to, the trial was awful. And I ended up running into the men's bathroom and just puking.
Justin Crenshaw was convicted of first-degree premeditated aggravated murder of Sarah Clark and Tanner Pell. And his only available sentence, since we don't really use the death penalty here in Washington anymore, is life without the possibility of parole. So he's incarcerated until he dies.
A year after it happened, I moved back to my house and nobody wanted me to, but I wanted to be close to him. I want him to be here. I want to talk to him every day. Everybody has their way of remembering, and I think how they want him to be remembered is, and me too, is the only way he can be is beautiful.
Mom, I love you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
We can't tell, we're trying to get into the room.
You can't open the door, can you not break the door down or anything?
I think the person is lying in front of the door.
Okay, so the person that you're calling about, can you see them?
It's just about through the bedroom door. There's blood everywhere. It looks like the person's been stabbed.
West Midlands Police have been alerted to a fatal stabbing in Birmingham. Forensic investigator Cara Nichols-Parkin is dispatched to assess the scene.
I've been working in forensics for 22 years now. I've dealt with hundreds of serious incidents and unfortunately a lot of murders. It's our job to go in there and identify who's responsible. We have to piece together what the forensic evidence is showing us.
There's a blood stain here. Blood drops all the way up the stairs.
The team head to the bedroom, where emergency services discovered a body. The man is identified as 30-year-old Kenneth Ford, the tenant of the property.
Really heavy blood stain here. There's just so much blood in here.
Cara starts by examining the victim for evidence of what could have happened.
He's got quite a lot of injuries. Whether the injuries in his head are from a tool of some sort, it's hard to say. He's got bruising around his knuckles and everything, so I suspect he's fought back at some point. He got lots of defensive wounds to his hands, which just shows that the attack had been going on for some time. We'll get his fingers and hands done first, and then we'll swab his black eye, in case obviously that was done with a fist.
Swabs are taken from the victim to check for the presence of anyone else's DNA.
There was nothing to suggest that this was a robbery or anything like that. Does he know the person that's committed the offence? We need to find out what's happened.
With a violent killer at large, police start urgent door-to-door inquiries.
I don't suppose you've heard any disorder over the last evening, this morning, I think?
It's fighting or somebody.
I can't really give you too much information. Have you seen or heard any disturbance over the road at all?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
I've seen is I've come here and go lunch.
Yeah. All right, no worries. Thank you guys for your help. Okay. Have you heard anything in there today?
Yeah, last night, yeah.
What time was that roughly? Could you hear anything in particular?
With evidence gathered from the bedroom, the forensic team follow the trail of blood downstairs.
With a situation like this where there's so much blood, there's a good chance there will be a transfer of blood from our victim onto the suspect. Spatter's potentially gone onto the clothing, fingerprints in blood.
There's some stain on the floor, and there's a lot of blood down here. Did it start down here and move up there, or has it been moving between the two?
The scene is secured for further forensic analysis, and Kenneth's body is removed for post-mortem.
Come quick chat here.
Officers at the scene identify the man who called the ambulance.
Basically, I had a call saying that, you need to call an ambulance for Ken. Something's happened. And I said, where are you? Call the ambulance if he's not in a good state. He goes, no, I've gone.
Can I ask who that was, mate?
His name's Gary O'Neill.
I'm just seeing if I can get any more on him.
An officer checks the police national database of all known offenders in the UK.
Gary O'Neill, there you go, got you. That's going to be him.
As a search begins for Gary O'Neill, Cara joins the homicide team, led by Detective Inspector Michelle Thurgood, for a case briefing.
Morning, everybody. This briefing this morning is in relation to the murder of Kenneth Ford. A phone call was made to a friend of the deceased from Gary O'Neill saying that Kenneth needed an ambulance.
I'll just run you through the scene we've got. So the front door leads into the lounge. There's a sofa that's underneath these stairs here. There's a lot of blood staining around that area. But then upstairs, so when you go upstairs, the deceased was found just behind the door. There's blood everywhere in the room. It's been a really nasty attack. He's got lots and lots of injuries. So we just need to establish what's gone on.
In terms of Gary O'Neill, obviously we need to get Gary an interview so we can understand what occurred and process him for any potential forensic evidence that he might have on himself or any of his clothing. And the murder weapon is still outstanding. Can we see what that weapon was? OK, thank you, everybody. It's clear that Kenneth Ford was the victim of a violent attack. At this moment in time, Gary O'Neill is the suspect, but I have to keep my mind open. He called to say Kenneth needs help, so he could be a witness. We do often have witnesses that don't come forward because they are frightened. We need to eliminate the fact that anybody else could be responsible.
So if we can just walk the street, yeah, and just line it from the centre of the road under the vehicles, we'll do the drains last.
A team of 8 specialist search officers is deployed to comb the square mile surrounding the crime scene in search of the murder weapon or any other forensic evidence that could identify the killer. With no sign of Gary O'Neill in the local area, officers begin to trace his card transactions, looking at where he's used it within the last 24 hours.
We can see where he's used his bank card. That can be financial transactions in shops, restaurants, or it can be use at cash points and ATMs. We can literally track any kind of expenditure that he's doing.
Gary's financial records reveal that he bought a coach ticket in the early hours of the morning, before Kenneth was found dead. Up to 15 coaches leave Birmingham Station every hour to destinations throughout the country.
He could be going anywhere all over the country. Our concern is that he's going somewhere where there's a port, where he can then continue his journey and leave the UK entirely.
Authorisation is granted to access Gary O'Neill's phone so that officers can analyse his cell site data.
Overnight, cell site used to be around the offence location, and then I haven't seen a trace of this phone until 15:52 today, and it's in Carlisle.
Carlisle sits 200 miles north of Birmingham.
When somebody's using the internet or social media platforms, or whether they're making actual phone calls, they're connected to a mast. All of that phone data can be tracked.
But he's now moving away from Carlisle.
He's following the M6.
Yeah, it's tracking up the M6 now. Already past Lockerbie.
So he's heading to Scotland.
Yeah.
This is a serious point in the investigation. If Gary O'Neill committed this offence, he's a dangerous man. We need to arrest Gary and get him into police custody.
An alert goes out on the UK's police databases that Gary O'Neill is now wanted on suspicion of murder. With bloodstains suggesting Kenneth was assaulted in different parts of the house, blood pattern analyst Phil Field is sent to the crime scene to determine how the attack unfolded. He starts by examining the bloodstains downstairs.
My role as a blood pattern analyst is to really examine the distribution of blood and determine what kind of activities within the scene might have occurred to produce that blood staining. A blood pattern can tell numerous stories. Plenty to support the view the injured party may well have been assaulted whilst sitting in this seat. I've got a number of questions. What was the nature of the attack and how many people may have been involved? What were the movements within the property?
There actually appears to be some clotting blood.
So it would suggest that the injured party has been here for a period of time that's sufficient to allow that clotting process to happen. The blood clotting process really is the body's natural response to an injury. Blood platelets grouping around the site of the injury to form a mesh to stop the bleeding occurring. It can take somewhere between 2 and 15 minutes for visible signs of clotting to appear.
Having analysed the blood patterns downstairs, Phil heads to the bedroom where Kenneth's body was found.
I've just discovered some spatter on the radiator behind this curtain. There's some moving transfer patterning going on here that indicates quite heavy contact with a heavily blood-wet item moving in contact with the radiator. So in terms of identifying an attack site in the property, this is definitely one. There actually appears to be some clotting blood and some tufts of hair in that stain.
The blood within this region provides really good evidence that this attack has occurred whilst the victim's injuries have already begun to form clotting blood. So his injuries have actually been sustained at least several minutes earlier. If I were to hypothesise, I'd be saying he's bled a lot here and then made his way upstairs where he's really taken more of a beating.
The different sites of clotted blood suggest that Kenneth was attacked over an extended period of time. Detectives have been searching for Kenneth's killer for 4 hours when they are alerted to an emergency call from a driver to his depot on a coach heading to Scotland.
This guy's an absolute spanner. Hasn't been able to utter a word that makes a sense. My dog can bark a sentence better. And he's harassing my brothers, roughly charging. But it's the way he's putting himself across. It's just like he's staring right through you.
Yeah.
It's as if you're a bit of glass. He's really not there.
Scottish police are called to remove the man and identify him as Gary O'Neill. They seize his possessions, including clothing.
I'm just looking to get a better understanding of who the suspect is in this case.
With Gary detained, Lisa turns to Kenneth's social media accounts to work out whether there's a connection between the two men.
We can do work then around their Facebook and things like that and see how closely linked they are. We can see on here that they come from the same area of Ireland and have moved to the area together from Ireland. This video was taken by Kenneth on the 27th, just a few hours before he's killed.
Now, this is just my house. Don't like this out. Don't get me wrong, I've only moved in. Carpet's going to be changed.
When Kenneth is showing us around the house, he's really proud of himself. He's proud that this is his home. He shows us the sofas in the living room where all the blood is found at the scene. And then he takes us up the stairs.
Now, that's like 2 beds. This is what Gary was used. As you can see, it's a big room I've gave him.
What is surprising about this video is that it looks like Gary and the deceased have been friends, like really good friends, and he wants to share this house with Gary.
Right now, this is room number 1 for Gary.
You can hear his voice, and he's happy and he's proud and he's looking forward to living with his friend.
Now, that's like 2 beds. This is what Gary...
Yet within 12 hours, something's happened that's ended up with Kenneth being killed. And I genuinely can't understand what would warrant this sort of attack on your friend.
The next morning, Gary O'Neill is transferred from Scotland to Birmingham for questioning.
Can I step over here, please, mate?
Stand here, Gary.
Can I have your name, please?
Gary O'Neill.
And the offence is arrested for, please.
Murder.
You've got to remember why you're here.
No, don't.
Well, you're here on suspicion of murder.
You said I was here for murder.
It's suspicion of murder. That's the offence.
Gary, if you understand, obviously murders is a serious allegation to put towards someone. So having you under arrest, okay, means we can interview you and we can get your side of the story.
No,
we know there's 2 sides to every story. Okay. I've got to ask you about your health and well-being. Do you suffer from any heart, epilepsy, asthma, diabetes or allergy?
No.
Okay.
But I did have a blood clot to the brain 10 years ago.
Okay. Any other physical medical condition? So what's that then, mate? You're a? Benzodiazepam. Do you have any injuries? So can you show me your hands? Okay. Right. In line with that then, Gary, I've heard what the officers told me. I'm happy that the arrest is lawful and legal, and therefore I'm going to authorise your detention.
323.
Swabs from Gary O'Neill will be tested for traces of Kenneth's DNA. They will also be compared to DNA found on Kenneth's body to determine if Gary was involved in causing his injuries.
Only DNA I'm gonna find here is my own DNA.
In the forensics department, crime scene coordinator Cara receives the initial post-mortem report.
It's quite shocking to see how many injuries are actually there. I think they're saying hundreds. Just the sheer quantity of injuries was probably the most injuries I've ever seen. It's obviously gone on for some time and it's took a lot of effort to cause all those injuries. It was a sustained attack. Cause of death is attributed to the head and facial injuries, only compatible with an assault with an implement. And at least a few resemble injuries compatible with the end of a claw hammer. So you can see, the two injuries with the gap in between, which is consistent with the claw.
With Gary in custody, detectives call upon Cara to establish a forensic strategy for the investigation.
I've just got Phil's findings. So there may have been an attack site downstairs, and there is clear evidence of an attack site upstairs. The presence of clotted blood here indicates that the attacks happened over a period of time.
Yeah.
It's been a frenzied attack. Loads of injuries, which look like potentially from a claw hammer.
So everyone that we have spoken to are saying Gary and Kenneth are really close friends their whole lives. They live together, they do everything together. So why Gary would then decide to kill Kenneth remains unclear. In terms of the forensic strategy, Cara, you've already put something in place around that, have you?
So it's going to be based around the blood and the transfer of blood between the two to put him there at the time of the actual assault, whereas his DNA within the scene isn't going to prove that he's committed the offence because he's been in that address a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Gary and Kenneth were really good friends, and I think he'd been staying at that address. So Gary's fingerprints and DNA would have been within the address. So we really needed to focus on transfer of the blood, fingerprints in blood, that would put someone there at the time of the actual offence where he was bleeding. We've got Gary's clothing, that is blood-stained, so we can identify whose blood that is. If Kenneth's blood's on Gary's clothing, then obviously that puts him at the scene at the time that the assaults happened.
Also really important for tying him in to actually the murder.
To determine whether Gary was present during the attack, Cara sends in a team of specialists to search for any fingerprints in blood at the scene.
Yeah, I can see some marks just on the banister rail here. Possibly could be ridge detail. Having looked at it, I think it's going to be best if I just cut it off here and here, and actually get that treated in the lab.
Due to the banister being on the stairs and that it's sort of circular in shape, it's quite difficult to actually photograph at the scene. So in this case, we decided to cut the banister out and send it into our fingerprint development lab.
If they can find a fingerprint in the blood, it could reveal who killed Kenneth. The mark in blood on the banister is fast-tracked for forensic examination.
There's quite a lot of blood staining, quite a lot of smears.
Forensic technician Vanessa Gardner scrutinises it for any ridge detail.
There's one particular area that looks like it might have some quite good detailing. Now we're going to have to use all the different light sources to see the best way that I can capture the actual ridge detail before we photograph it. We can see the area of ridge detail in blood, and this filter is making the blood appear darker, so it's giving us more contrast.
Next, the ridge detail is chemically treated with acid dye, which can make blood fluoresce to enhance any fingerprints.
For this item, I'm using acid violet. With this, because it is quite heavily blood stained, I can see that the blood's already reacting. Just need to move it into the wash now, acid wash, and just get rid of some of the background staining and to give us the most contrast.
The ridge detail must be further enhanced to be usable for the fingerprint bureau.
We're getting contrast, but we're losing the ridge detail, so when we turn it into a grayscale image, that might be better for the fingerprint expert to have a look at. We're getting good contrast, so that's the mark that I'll be sending up to the bureau.
The fingerprint bureau will compare the mark against both Kenneth's and Gary's prints. Detectives are still trying to establish whether Gary O'Neill was at the house on the night of the attack, and if he was alone.
OK, so we've got some footage from the scene, which is Colebrook Road.
They retrieve footage of the streets near Kenneth's house from the day he was killed.
Kenneth Ford has been killed in a particularly brutal attack. We have no murder weapon and we have no forensic evidence to link the suspect to the scene at the time of the attack.
Oh, there he is.
Here we've got the suspect walking towards the front door. The suspect goes into the address. There's a couple of other people with him and they look like they've got a pushchair.
And what time's that at?
This is at 22:58. So they've all gone into the address. I think this is them leaving now. So now we're on 23:21. So they've been there about 22 minutes maybe altogether. Yeah. And we can see the suspect and the person who we believe is the deceased in the doorway.
Yeah. Because he's quite tall, isn't he?
He is tall. We've just got the suspect and the deceased left in the home address, haven't we, at that point?
Yeah. The suspect leaves, screen time of 01:57.
Yeah.
And then he looks to be a little bit worried about that.
Yeah,
yes, definitely.
Okay.
So he walks off the other way, but the other way is a dead end. So he kind of waits a little minute, walks up there, and then comes back past.
So it looks like he's carrying a big, shopping bag, isn't it? We could have taken the murder weapon with him.
Yeah, looks like it. So in between the witnesses leaving and this time now, nobody else comes or goes to the address.
This is a real breakthrough for us because this shows that no one else is in that property, just Kenneth and Gary, which obviously leads us to believe that no one else can be responsible for what's happened to Kenneth.
With the new CCTV footage and evidence gathered from the crime scene, Gary is taken in for questioning.
So, Gary, you were arrested on the offence of murder. The law states murder is where a person of sound mind and discretion unlawfully kills with intent to kill or cause grievous bodily harm. Did you commit murder against Kenneth Ford?
No comment.
Okay, Gabby, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some CCTV that we've recovered. Is that Ken that's come to the door there, Gary?
No comment.
We know when the unknown male and female had left that it is yourself and Kenneth in that property.
Is that you?
No comment.
What looks like a shopping bag in your hand?
No comment.
Was Kenneth alive at that point?
No comment.
Okay. We're showing the full photographs of injuries to Kenneth's head. They're not pleasant, okay? He's been subject to what appears to be a frenzied attack. Blunt force trauma on his head, other injuries on his torso. How has he got those?
No comment.
What weapon did you use to hurt Ken?
No comment.
What I'm going to show you now are photographs of the address. We have bedding that's heavily saturated in blood. You're nodding your head, and then you can see blood on what appears to be the door. Whose blood is that?
No comment.
Have there been any disputes between you and Ken? Were you angry?
No comment.
Whose blood is that on your clothing?
No comment.
If those clothes are sent off, will there be any of Kenneth's blood?
No comment.
Will it be your blood?
No comment.
Kenneth is dead.
You were there that evening?
That's your mate, isn't it? You've come to England together for a better life. This is your opportunity to tell us what has happened.
No comment.
Okay. We'll conclude the interview now then.
Gary O'Neill has given no account. If somebody is innocent, why would they choose not to raise an account? The CCTV confirms that he was at the house, but it doesn't prove that he is the person responsible for the death of Kenneth. What we need is forensic evidence that categorically shows that he committed the murder.
So I'm just laying the item out just so I can see it from the front.
The top that Gary was wearing when he was arrested has been sent to a specialist laboratory to examine for blood.
Straight away, I found some red brown staining. So I'll test it using Castlemaire and see if it gives a positive reaction.
The faint spatter marks on Gary's top are tested using a filter paper. Next, a chemical mixture is added that contains phenolphthalein, followed by hydrogen peroxide. If blood is present, the chemical will react by turning pink.
Pink reaction there, so that is a positive for blood.
Right, so what we got, hoodie?
Yeah.
Hoodie top.
With the marks confirmed as blood, forensic scientist Steve Paddock begins a detailed blood pattern analysis.
If we find Kenneth's blood on Gary's clothing, then that would be crucial for the investigation because it would put Gary at the scene at the time that Kenneth was bleeding. So we've got a direct link with him to the assault.
Right. Let's have a look at this. It's quite widespread, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Some contact staining down the right sleeve. Some of it quite heavy. During an assault, you might have blood transferred in a number of different ways. Firstly, when a perpetrator or their clothing comes into direct contact with a source of wet blood, and it will create what we call a contact or transfer blood stain. The second way is where airborne droplets are projected through the air. Blood can be flicked off a hand or a weapon, or if a forceful blow is delivered into a source of wet blood. We have got some airborne stains on the hood as well. The size of these stains are very small, some of them less than 1 millimetre. This indicates it's most likely to be caused by impact spatter, forceful blow into a source of wet blood, and the force of the blow has caused the blood to break up into droplets. We may only expect these droplets to travel maybe no more than a metre. So by observing such small droplets on someone's clothing, really it places them in very, very close proximity. So in this allegation, we've got a suggestion the wearer has repeatedly struck an individual with a hammer. The victim's got blunt force injuries to his head. So to me, particularly this impact spatter would be very much in keeping with that. Quite odd-looking staining, quite like a downwards direction.
Yeah.
One explanation for that is the hammer's been swung with blood.
Yeah.
It's wet with blood, it's been swung and stopped. His right shoulder and the blood's projected down to the lower rear of his back. Let's take a couple of stains for DNA. Certainly, if DNA matches the victim, then certainly take some explaining.
Yeah.
The blood samples will be analysed for DNA profiles to determine whether the blood belongs to Kenneth or Gary. The ridge detail print, taken from the banister, has been expedited to fingerprint expert Claire Lynch. A match to Gary would prove that he was in the house at the time Kenneth was killed.
We've got apparent friction ridge detail. Friction ridge detail is the little lines that we have on our fingers, is what allows us to identify somebody. So in this case, there is ridge flow. It's an indication to me that that's not necessarily a finger digit, but it's actually a piece of palm. On our palms, we have ridge flow. All of those ridges have characteristics, like a fingerprint. We're going to be looking at this area here on the palm, because between the digits on palms, the ridges flow underneath and make a loop pattern. So that is something we can use to identify somebody with.
Before checking if Gary's fingerprints are a match, Claire first compares the image with Kenneth's prints to eliminate him.
When we're looking at our characteristics, we want to ensure that the characteristics on this side, which is our recovered side, match exactly to the ridge characteristics of our known impression. Because this impression is apparently in blood, the quality of the impression is actually really quite poor. So we've got to be aware that some things may look a little bit thicker, a little bit chunky. Sometimes that impression that's been left, dependent on whatever surface it's been left on, it can actually make certain characteristics look slightly distorted, and that can make it very difficult for us to identify somebody. So we have a ridge coming down here, a ridge coming down here, and they join at the bottom and then carry on. On our known image, we've got a ridge coming down here, a ridge coming down here, and they join and carry on. This characteristic here is called a bifurcation. 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So I'm counting here. So I've got a ridge ending that's coming up, and then I've got 3 intervening ridges. So they're just ridges that go between 2 different points of characteristics. We call it coincidence sequence, and it's just where we have the same characteristics in the same placement from one to the other. It just takes one difference to say that it's not that person. So I'm satisfied that everything that I've marked from this impression is actually present in the fingerprint form. My conclusion is that it is an identification to the right palm of the deceased person.
Confirmation that the fingerprint is Kenneth's means that detectives still need forensic evidence that places Gary at the scene at the time of the murder.
In my opinion, from his own actions post-offence, Gary is the person responsible for the death of Kenneth. So it's really important we look at all the possible lines of inquiry to link Gary to the attack. You went last week up to Glasgow in terms of other inquiries with the custody staff.
While awaiting the results of the blood analysis on Gary's top, detectives revisit evidence gathered by Scottish police at the time of his arrest.
No statements from any custody staff that had any dealings with Gary. And the CCTV from the custody block to show his demeanour, how he was reacting. All of that could be really crucial to the investigation.
So we've got statements from the custody team. His initial comment was, "Why am I here?" And she said West Midlands Police were coming to collect him at some point to speak about a murder. And then he's asked, "Is the person dead?" And she said, "Well, if it's murder, then the person has to be dead." She said that he started to get really upset then, with tears flowing down his face. And then he had said that they'd had some kind of falling out.
Which is really, really interesting, bearing in mind he then went on to say no comment in interview.
And then he's gone on to say, "How long do you get for murder?" And the lady's replied, "Well, anything up to life. It all depends on the circumstances." He then said, "I wouldn't get done for murder if it was an accident."
That statement is a really, really significant statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
To have obtained.
Yeah,
Excellent.
definitely.
Gary may not have known whether Kenneth was dead. He did phone the witness and say, "Get him help," which suggests potentially he didn't know. One way or the other, Gary O'Neill is a risk to the public, and we still need forensic evidence which puts Gary in that premises at the time of the offence.
Scientist Steve Paddock receives the results from the blood found on Gary's top.
So what we're looking at here is the DNA results from one of the spots of blood on Gary O'Neill's grey hooded top. We look at 17 specific areas of DNA in an individual's genome. Each area would normally expect to see 2 DNA components, one inherited from each parent. Where we only have 1 peak, this means the same area of DNA has been inherited from this individual's mum and from the dad. Also, what we're seeing is these minor contributions of DNA. So we have DNA from at least 2 individuals within the result. One individual has contributed significantly more DNA than the second. So what we have here is I have Gary O'Neill's reference DNA profile. This represents a graphical representation of this string of numbers. So if we look at this first area of DNA, I can see that Gary O'Neill, his components are a 15 and a 17. So they are represented within this DNA profile. We can see that there's a major designation of a 22 and a 23, and a minor designation of an 18 and a 19. If we refer to Gary O'Neill's reference DNA profile, I can see he is in fact an 18-19. So we can see that it's possible that Gary O'Neill has contributed a very small amount of DNA to this result. This is not an uncommon finding. We'll pick up some background cellular material, generally from the wearer themselves. What I have now is a reference DNA profile obtained from Kenneth Ford. As we can see at the first area, Kenneth Ford has a single peak and it's designated as a 15. We move on to the second area of DNA. Within Kenneth Ford's reference DNA profile, again, this is a single peak, this time designated as a 14. If we compare this to the same area of DNA from a blood sample taken from the jacket, we can see this is a large single peak designated as a 14. And in fact, if we go along the remaining areas of DNA, we can see a Kenneth Ford DNA profile matches the major contribution obtained from the blood sample on the jacket. To me, this will provide very powerful evidence that this blood has in fact originated from Kenneth Ford.
Confirmation that the blood on Gary's top belongs to Kenneth is the forensic evidence detectives need to charge him.
Right, we've gone to CPS with all the evidence, and CPS have authorised a charge for you. Your charges for murder, so between the 27th of the 2nd, 22 and the 28th of the 2nd, 22 in the county of Birmingham, murdered Kenneth Ford, contrary to common law. Okay, have you got any replies to that charge? No.
After being charged with the murder of his friend, Kenneth Ford, Gary O'Neill submits a defence statement.
We have the defence case statement for Mr. O'Neill. Quite interesting and not probably what we expected. Gary says, I had an argument with Kenneth Ford. During the course of the argument, he told me to leave his house. I went to get my PlayStation and he said that I couldn't have it. Hit me on the head, knocked me down. He kept hitting me and I was worried as I had previously had a serious head injury. I tried to hit out to stop him but couldn't. I then picked up the hammer, which was on the floor in a tool bag. I hit him with the hammer to stop him from hurting me. I do not know how many times I hit him with the hammer. I remember hitting him downstairs, but I have no recollection of hitting him upstairs. I did not set out that evening to kill Kenneth Ford. I am sorry for what happened. First point and the key point is he accepts causing the death of Kenneth. So comparing what he says was the assault by Kenneth, what are his injuries?
As far as I'm aware, I don't think he had one injury on him at all.
He then talks about a psychiatric report whereby he talks about head injury sustained and finishes it off by saying, I will plead not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. This defence case statement has a huge impact on the investigation because we are now looking at a potential plea of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. Diminished responsibility is where you've got an abnormality of mental functioning from a recognised medical condition that may affect the ability to form a rational view on what is happening at that moment in time. Traditional forensics gives us potentially the who, the where, maybe even the when. Forensic psychology can assist us understanding the why.
To decide whether Gary has grounds for diminished responsibility due to his head trauma, the Crown Prosecution Service calls upon an independent forensic neuropsychologist to make a clinical assessment.
Forensic psychology is increasingly being seen as of assistance to the court. Other forensic sciences, blood pattern, fingerprints and so on, have a physical manifestation they're looking at. In psychology, we're dealing more with what was the function of this behaviour? Why did he behave the way he did? It's an extraordinary behaviour. Why would someone do that? Somebody might have some impairment or damage that means they don't understand the nature of the act or they don't understand that it is wrong. So for example purposes, here's a scan of a brain. What we're interested in is where there might be some gaps or lesions in the brain. And that can happen with head trauma, which could be as a result of blows to the head. In this example model, we might think that there was damage here, where there's a black area, so no blood flow getting there behind the right eye in the frontal area of the brain. It's a little bit like if there's roadworks and you can't get down a certain street, the blood can't get to that part of the brain. If that impaired, we can't think things through properly before acting. Behaving becomes impulsive and not something that's completely under our own control at all. So in Mr. O'Neill's case, he says he's had a head injury. And when looking at diminished responsibility, an absolute sort of cornerstone of our work is to look at whether somebody is telling the truth. Are they attempting to exaggerate difficulties, pretend they have a problem that doesn't actually exist? Now, maybe he has had those things, but we have ways and means with the testing that we do to detect people who are faking. This is a murder trial. It will have significant consequences for the accused. It already has very significant consequences for the families of the poor deceased. I would be running between 15 and 20 separate psychometric testings to give it the gravity that it deserves and make sure I get a full and proper set of information and opinion to offer to the court.
While psychological assessments are carried out on Gary, Michelle must decide whether to recommend the Crown Prosecution Service accept his plea of manslaughter and move to sentencing, or recommend that he be tried by jury for murder.
We received the first psychiatric report on behalf of the defence on his mental health and specifically around a head injury and whether a head injury he'd historically suffered could be responsible for Gary potentially committing this crime. As you know, Gary is going to make that guilty plea to manslaughter. My decision, along with the Crown Prosecution Service, is whether we accept that plea. The decision whether to go from murder to accepting a plea of manslaughter, diminished responsibility, is not an easy choice. The difference between a conviction for murder and a manslaughter can be huge. Murder carries a mandatory life sentence. Manslaughter can attract as little as 3 years. Somebody has been killed. Their families are always at the forefront of everything we do, but it has to be evidence-led.
It's a sustained attack. This is the downstairs, a lot of blood here, but then it's gone upstairs, so that obviously shows that it's happened over a period of time. These are some of the injuries that were sustained. He got injuries across most of his body.
How many injuries were there altogether?
I believe there was 112 in total.
In terms of volume, there's a huge amount of injuries that I've personally seen.
The hammer used in the offence hasn't been recovered.
No. Correct.
And he's had the presence of mind to attempt to flee the country.
This is someone who knows what they're doing. Having gathered all the forensic evidence, my absolute view is that rather than just accepting a plea for manslaughter, This should be a trial for murder.
After 17 hours of consultation over the course of 3 weeks, Dr. Green completes his assessments. He must recommend to the jury whether Gary O'Neill's plea of diminished responsibility should be considered by the court or dismissed.
After assessing Mr. O'Neill, there was clear evidence that the head trauma caused damage to his brain such that blood is now not flowing to parts of his brain that would help him control and organise his behaviour, and he's incapable of stopping himself once he has begun acting. Across many of the tests, looking at his ability to weigh things up, he's scoring around the first percentile. This means that 99% of the population would be more able than Mr. O'Neill to plan their behaviour and understand the consequences of their actions. It's my opinion that a defence of diminished responsibility may well be open to Mr. O'Neill due to this organic damage to his brain, which were material to his behaviour at the time.
Diminished responsibility is very complicated and it has a huge impact on the investigation because it's the difference between murder and manslaughter, and Dr. Green's assessment is a key part of the evidence. It's right and proper that the jury have the opportunity to consider all the evidence and reach a verdict. I thought I'd just give you an update from the trial. So, Gary did give evidence, but says he doesn't remember what happened.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all. The jury took the view that potentially brain trauma, that affects his ability to remember, and that affects his actions on the evening, and came back with a verdict of not guilty murder, which by natural default means he is guilty to manslaughter, diminished responsibility.
Forensics led to him pleading guilty. We just haven't got the murder verdict, have we? Disappointing.
Forensic psychology is becoming increasingly part of murder investigations. Its importance will continue to grow in the coming years as we understand more and more about the impacts of mental health on people's actions. The jury verdict of guilty to manslaughter was obviously very hard for Kenny's family.
Now, this is just my house. Look at the size of it.
They will always believe the sentence is not equivalent to the fact that their son has lost his life. Diminished responsibility gives a reason. It's not an excuse.